The author is the 6th episode of the 5th season of Everybody Loves Raymond. This is directed by Andy Ackerman, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. It's a pretty decent episode, maybe not my favourite, but it still works really well. It starts off with Ray asking Debra to pick up the slack, to use his term, which is obviously ironic because Debra's usually the one who's running around doing everything. And Debra eventually agrees to go camping on her own with the children because Ray wants to spend the time finishing his book, finishing his chapters to send to the publisher so he can hopefully get his book published, which he's really excited about. And Debra says, okay, as long as you work. It's not a weekend to have fun, it's a weekend to work. And then we cut immediately to after the weekend. Debra comes in with the kids, love her outfit, and Marie and Frank are there. And probably a minute later, maybe less than a minute, Ray walks in the door with his golf bag. He's clearly been having fun. But, as he explains to Debra, he had finished his chapters, he did the work, so he had fun afterwards. Which is fair enough. It would have been worse if he hadn't done the work. He could have very easily said, oh, I was having some downtime to let thoughts percolate, which is fair enough, unless you've made a promise to your wife to not do that. So the fact that he'd done his chapters, I think, is fair enough. And he then finds out that the publishers didn't really like the chapters. They're not going to commission him to write the full book. They're not going to publish it. And it just so happens that in that moment, Robert is there with some exciting news. And he's very clearly scared to tell this news because he doesn't want to gloat in front of Ray, who's just got this unfortunate bit of information. But it turns out Robert's made lieutenant. And people are trying to be excited without being too excited, but ultimately they allow themselves to celebrate, which I think is fair enough, because Robert being lieutenant and everybody celebrating that isn't going to change the fact that they don't want to publish Ray's book. Ray and Debra are then in bed, and Ray is sulking, and as a writer, I think his sulking is fair. You put your heart and soul into it, and granted there are other publishers. There's nothing stopping him from submitting it to other publishers, but nevertheless, he's feeling rejected, and if you're a creative of any kind and you've been rejected, it hurts. Even when it's not personal, it hurts. And Debra, I think, said all of the right things, but she was getting a bit annoyed at him sulking, which I also don't blame her for. I think everybody's feelings here were valid. I think everybody had a very believable response to the situation. And Debra then points out that Robert never gets anything. And the one time he gets something, he gets a bit of great news, and Ray basically has a tantrum and he storms out of the room. And Ray realizes that actually, yeah, his behavior probably wasn't ideal in that moment. So he goes over to speak with Robert over at Marie and Frank's, and this is where the bulk of the rest of the episode is. And they basically get into a huge argument. It starts off quite nice. They're sitting together, and then they start throwing food and having a bet, and then it escalates and they get into this big argument, and then this physical fight. It starts with Ray pushing Robert and ripping his jumper, so Robert pushes Ray into the piano, and it's beautifully executed, very funny, very well done. Wouldn't surprise me if either of them actually got genuinely hurt in the process, because it was a lot, and it worked really well, and it only diffuses when Marie and Frank come in. And it just kind of fizzles out a little bit there at the end. But actually, this is something I've noticed a lot with Everybody Loves Raymond. Certainly, the more recent episodes, a lot of the endings just kind of fall a little bit flat. And it seems to be a bit of a pattern. It's not a huge issue, but I have found that a lot of the endings just kind of stop. They just kind of drop off, and they're not necessarily the most satisfying. But the final scene I did really like, because we're back over at Ray and Debra's, and Frank is asleep on the chair, and Ray and Robert decide to start throwing food at Frank. And then Debra joins in, which I thought was really nice. And it's nice to show that also Debra's not annoyed at Ray for playing golf, and she wasn't being unreasonable about that, where she often is unreasonable. Not always. She sometimes has valid feelings for things that are not over the top, but with this one, yeah, I think her response was fair. I liked the episode. It's not the funniest, but I think it's still well done, still ultimately quite enjoyable, and in general, I have no complaints. It's never going to be a favourite episode, but that being said, I thought the author was pretty decent, and I'm sure it's an episode that I'll always enjoy.